So my idea with this presentation, hopefully you will get some new ideas where you need to be in order to start doing analytics. Because when we look at analytics, this is challenging. And if you ask yourself if there ever was a problem where before you did it, you had all the facts on the table and there were no extra information there that you needed to filter out, and there was nothing missing. This is, of course, true for many projects, for many things we do, but I think it's especially true when it comes to analytics. There are always things missing, and there is definitely too much information. So what this means is that we need to learn new things. And we also need to challenge ourselves and the people around us in doing this. And it also means that we need to change. We need to create a transformation. And it's a typical transformation, and it's, of course, as we have spoken about earlier this day, it's a digital transformation. The challenge when it comes to the data can be illustrated by this picture. So if we have all the information, what I need to understand might be inside that circle, or it might reside elsewhere. This means that it's very common that I need to filter because there is too much. I need to transform it to be able to use it, but I also need to extend when I'm looking for the source of data that I need in order to draw my conclusions. So I'm going to learn you a new Swedish word. It's a very typical Swedish word that I think speaks very much about the data that we're looking for. And the word is lagom. It means in English, not too little, not too much. And that's exactly what we're looking for when it comes to data. So in preparing this presentation, I was thinking about different topics that I could touch on. One is, of course, data acquisition. Another one is the technology that we can use in order to look at this data. And the third thing is our toolbox. We'll be touching on all these subjects, but it's primarily the little lamp that we see up there that's my focus. And by the way, this is the same thing that we saw on the first slide, and that's also my last slide. So when you see this man with this little light over his head, then you know, okay, the presentation is over. You can clap your hands if you want to. So how do we get to lagom? This is, if there is one slide that you should remember, it's this one. First, we define what questions do we need answers for. And then we let the data follow. I'll take it once again because this is very important. First we define the questions and then we let the data follow. That way we know what is lagom when it comes to the data that we're looking at. So if we look at classical sales analysis, and this is just an example of things that we're currently doing. So every company is looking at the quotes that they win. And based on that, they try to draw conclusions what will happen in the future. What we can do with the CPQ system is that we can also look at the quotes that we didn't win, because then we have something where we can compare. So we can compare, is there things correlating with the won deals, and is it something correlating with the lost deals? That's what we want to find out. And we want to do this, of course, per market segment, and also per model or per system that we're selling. What is opening up now, you cannot have a presentation like this without touching on the subject of big data. This was coined in 2009. And this is the natural resource of the information economy. And with this huge amount of data that we're gathering in our systems, we can do the same things but with more data. So a little bit more precision. Or we can start doing absolutely new things that we never thought were possible. And that's where I want to challenge you sitting in this room today. So why are we lucky? We're sort of in the same situation that this man, and some of you might recognize him, were in back in 1994. It was a growing field. There was endless possibilities that he saw back in 1994. And his question was, and that was the internet at the time. It was expanding by 1,000% per year. And he was thinking, what is currently happening in the business that can be done better using the internet? So he reviewed the top 20 mail order that was existing at the time and figured out that there is no good solution for books. So maybe I should try to sell books online. That's a perfect use of the internet. We're in the same situation today when it comes to the data and the data that we can extract from CPQ. So what can we do better with these new possibilities? So that's why we're lucky. Why are we not so lucky? This is a new field. And the thing is, just as I'm getting questions in presenting this, you will be questions when you try to introduce this. Because some of the things that we do are difficult to explain. Doing a presentation like this, it's always a bonus if you can in some way include a quote by some president. So I found this one just to give us some hope for the future. It's not the critics who counts. The credit belongs to the persons or the people who's in the arena who try to do something. But just keep in mind that doing what we need to do, there will be some criticism. So we already said we should define the questions. We must find our ideal data set. That might not only be data from CPQ, it might be other sources of information that we need to connect to this data in order to draw our conclusions. And of course, we need to make sure that this can be accessed. We need to clean this data. And then to start off, we need to do some exploratory analysis, like plots to see if there are patterns that we didn't know. Every time I look into a CPQ solution, I'm surprised how the users actually are using the system. And these plots, this exploratory analysis help me get a lot of insights from the very beginning. But that's the starting point. Then we need to have some statistical knowledge as well, so that we can do accurate predictions. And we need to interpret this result, test it, and then distribute it so it can start helping the business in all. It's not beneficial that I know this. It's information and actions that needs to go out into the company. And when it comes to statistics, it's very rare that we get clear data. And it's important that you know what you know and you know what you don't know. And when there are things that we don't know, we need to go out and find the answers. This, of course, means that we need to be aware of some basic statistic. We need to brush up the knowledge. We all have some knowledge about it, but we need to be better. We need to understand probability, likelihood, the common distributions. There is no bell curve when I look at the data in CPQ. And we need to understand the confidence intervals as well. And of course, we need to test so that we don't jump to erroneous conclusions. Just the fact that we're working with something like big data doesn't take away the necessity for statistics. So, a few words about this with data acquisition. In CPQ, we can use the API to extract information. If we do this in TC Site, we can use a plugin to achieve the same thing. Then we must rely on the APIs of the CRM and the ERP systems and the other systems where we find our ideal data set to extract this information and get it all together. Maybe we do this one time, but most likely it's an ongoing process so that we'll be able to follow trends, things happening in our CPQ solution. The technology that I work with almost on a daily basis, that's the BI tools that we see here. So I work primarily with Click or with Excel. But of course we can use other techniques in achieving this data, like R programming or getting this information into our data warehouse, which we've done with some customers. It's a challenge, but at the same time, when we get the CPQ data together with what we have in the warehouse, we can do so much more. And of course, this can be done standalone or integrated. So a little bit about the toolbox that you saw next to the man with a little light. In order to understand this data, we will realize that this is not the ideal data set. And one way of solving this is actually introducing new questions in the CPQ so that we can pinpoint what kind of customer is this? What's the requirement? When I'm selling this truck, is this going to carry cement or is it going to carry timber? Because that will help me later in my process of understanding my customer. So it will not necessarily filter out options in the guided in CPQ itself, but it will help me use that data in a much better way. Another thing is, of course, to group the dimension. This is classical BI procedures, to not look at every country at the same time, but create regions where we want to see proxy markets and such. Another thing that I find interesting, and I don't think was possible before, which is a new opportunity, is to find patterns within the data that can help us understand the users better. Just to give you a short example, if we see that we have some users, they go in a CPQ, they click 2 or 3 questions and they're done. They create their quote. And then we have other users that go through every single question and answering very specifically. And if we look back at the Tacton Day 2013, Tetra Pak was presenting. It was actually Nils, who you saw earlier today, who was presenting at the time. Their conclusion, because they are very good at doing these kind of analysis, was that the more they knew about the customer, the less likelihood they had of closing that deal. Which is a little bit counterintuitive, but when you think of it, with their product portfolio, it actually makes sense. Because if somebody goes to Tetra Pak and says, I would like to have a nice juice package for kids, they have a very good solution. But the more you as a customer narrow it down and specify the diameter of the straw and everything, well, you'll be a little bit in the corner and the end solution might not be as good. So, just as an example. So, we use histograms to divide our users or our parameters or whatever we want to divide to create better clarity. Maybe we do use matrices when we do this 2-dimensional, or we do some cluster analysis where we do this multi-dimensional. There are several tools here. And then, of course, we can merge it with other data. Let's move on to this one. Just to describe the blocks that we're going to use and where we should and shouldn't be. So, this is an illustration of data science in general. So we have our expertise knowledge. We know the product. We are the product experts. Then we have some hacking skills to get this data into our data repository. And then we need to have some mathematical and statistical knowledge in order to manage this data. And there are, if we only have the expertise and the math and statistics, that's traditional research. If we only have the hacking skills and the statistics, that's what we refer to as machine learning. And where we definitely should not be, and that's really the conclusion of this slide, is the danger zone, where we do take our expertise and we take our hacking knowledge and we skip the statistics. Then we're on thin ice. So this is where we want to be. This is where I see the CPQ analytics. One interesting thing with this big data is the possibilities that it opens up for. And I'll give you one example. Some of you might recognize this man as well. I didn't, so don't worry. His name is Nate Silver. In 2008, based on open data, not going out doing any questions or so, just using open data sources, he predicted the outcome of the American election in 49 out of 50 states. Who was going to win state per state? So by looking at patterns that he found in data, he could actually do this prediction. And just as Amazon is obvious to us today what it is, this kind of way of using existing information to come to other conclusions, to knowing things without asking specific questions, it's not going to surprise us in 10 years. Of course, we were already doing some analysis today. We do it before we configure, we do it during the configuration, and we also look at, like I showed with the comparison of the quotes that we win or lose. We do that already. So in our rundowns, of course, we define the products that's our product, or the subcomponents of our product and the logic, and by consequence we can see that certain products can never be sold. This is a typical exercise in the beginning and also in the continuation of a Tacton project. Of course, we look into how the tool is used. What are the popular questions? What are the popular answers? And other behaviors as well, just to create less clutter and promote the important questions. And then we do the outcome analysis and we look at the hit rate. Offered, never sold, offered, always bought. So maybe we are on average on the 25% hit rate. And what we can do now is to say, if we cut the data like this or sort it like this, we can say that in these cases we have a 30% likelihood, and in these cases we have a 15% likelihood of closing the deal, depending on how the questions were answered, maybe what country, region, customer. What I want to do is to separate these numbers even more. So that box there, instead of giving me a 30 to 15, it will give me an 80 to 5. Because that's the way where we can avoid sending out quotes that we will never win. If we can say that trying to sell this truck, the combination of this motor and this gearbox, doesn't work on this market, then we have achieved something really great. And that's the kind of things that I'm looking for. And there are so many areas of interest here. I'll just mention a few. So we can start doing, take price sensitivity, for example. If you go and buy a car in Sweden, it's expected that you get a really good discount on your winter tires. So the price sensibility on winter tires is very high. If I don't get the discount, that's a deal breaker, because then the auto dealer is trying to rip me off. If we can say this about the subcomponents of our product, we can be smarter when it comes to discounts. Put the discount where it matters for closing the deal. Of course, we can look at the conflicts that we have in the product. Because when we sit and test our configuration models, we see some things turn gray. Just by starting to adding this up, say that we're selling trucks, we have 10 different motors, we have 10 different gearboxes. Looks good. So in reality, there are maybe 50 valid combinations. But when I, as a customer, specify my timber truck, maybe I'm down only to 2 motors. Maybe there is only 1 gearbox for me to select. Then the perceived configurability, difficult word, of this product is really reduced to a minimum. And this is a feedback that I need to get back to my research and development when we're developing the product. Because that could actually be an explanation why we're not so successful selling timber trucks. So if we look even further, we should actually be able to say, well, your pricing model is correct. Or we can say, your pricing model is screwed up within these areas. That's the thing with this new possibility with this big data we have, are things that are possible to achieve. Currently, we have 3 different sources. We have the outcome from the configurator. We have the behavior, what is clicked at what time, the selection order of things. Somewhat difficult to analyze, but all still very useful information. And then we have information about the user and the customer. So with this information, think that we could identify the misuse of discounts, that we can validate the current pricing model, that we can understand this, as I talked about, the price sensitivity, the flexibility of our product portfolio, and what selections that should actually be made by the sales rep to increase the hit rate. Of course, we also want to understand the drivers. Why is customer buying from us? And I think we can find behavioral patterns to figure that out. Another thing, if we think a little, let's take a step away from sales. There are other things that are difficult within a company. So say that we're releasing the 11th motor, and we want to know how should we predict how this will sell. That we can actually use this data and the configuration logic to simulate in how many cases of what we sold during the last quarter should this motor have been selected instead by the default strategies. And if we use this in combination with other techniques, we can also work more strategically to promote this motor in order to achieve our goals with this new product introduction. So, with that said, I'd just like to summarize what's been told during this session. So, the important thing to remember, we started with the question and the data. It's not necessarily so that we have all the data from the beginning. We had a little anecdote about the founder of Amazon and where he was in 1994. I don't think that we're really in 1994. A lot of things have already happened. I think we're about 1998. It was a good year. We talked about the necessity for some statistic knowledge. And I just signed up on an online course to brush up my statistical knowledge, because I see this is vital if I'm going to proceed within this topic. I didn't put words in this presentation that I didn't know, but I know that there are other words that I need to learn as well. And then we talked about the logom and the different areas. What we didn't say, and why I sneaked Amazon in here, was that as we speak, we are downloading this kind of information right now from the Amazon cloud for a live production CPQ user to analyze the one loss analysis, which is a big question for them. But we didn't go through and see the fancy graphs. That's for the YouTube presentation that you find through the Tacton YouTube channel. And we didn't say that many of these things we have already done. So if you have questions on how to define your ideal data set and clean the data, we can tell you. And we could go in and talk about the statistical tools that we need to understand, but we won't do that. Hopefully, at this point, you will have some new insights on what's ahead. So I'm very clear on that I'm not giving you the tools, and that was not my intention with this presentation. My intention was just to expand your mind what needs to be done in order to do analytics, because it's not the report that we put on the table. It's a new field where we can find questions to answers, or answers to questions actually, in a whole new way.